Good morning. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Moed Kattan Daf Zayin, and we're starting at the very top line. The next section of the Mishnah the Gemara is discussing reads as follows: Rabbi Yehuda Omer misteha ilan kedarko, misteha lavan shelo kedarko. That when one needs to kill rodents in their field, and it's chol hamoed, so if it's a stay ilan, if it's a field of trees, so then the animals can be killed kedarko. We assume that the animals are going to cause a hefsid. Because they're very damaging to trees, these particular animals, and therefore it's kedarko. And they stay lavan, but when it comes to a grain field, lav dafka, and therefore we're not as concerned about their misbehaviors, and therefore you can still trap them, but then it has to be shelo kedarko, some type of shinui. Let's get into some of the details here. Tana Rabbanan, Ketzad kedarko. What was the normal way to trap rodents? So back in the day, this is what they did. Chofer guma v'tola b'metzuda. They would dig a hole that was connected to the network that the rodents would use underground, and they place a basket by one of the holes that they dug in the ground. When the animal was there, they dropped the basket on. Kesat shelo kedarko. What's the abnormal way to trap the rodents in the field on chol hamoed? Noit shipud umake b'kordum umardaho adama mitachta. Basically, you take a long rod and you hit it into the ground, and it shakes the ground and causes the tunnels to collapse, and it kills the animals that way. That's brisa number one, just the parameters of what normal and abnormal would be. How does this translate halacha l'maisa? I'm not sure, but I would imagine that we would deem rodents in our house to be unacceptable, and we could probably do so kedarko. It's really not our way of life. We're a bunch of istinus people, so we probably could set up regular rodent and mouse traps in our homes. We wouldn't view it as a tircha yisera, I presume. Says the Gemara 6 lines down, another brisa. Tanya Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Amru, when the Chachamim told us mistei lavan shelo kedarko, that in a grain field that you cannot use a normal way because we're not concerned about the regular hefsid. That was only true. That's only true when the stay love in the grain field was near a city. However, if you have a grain field that's close to a tree field, so then, as mentioned earlier in the Mishnah, because we're so concerned about the tree field that these rodents will ruin the trees, which would be a hefsid, so on chol hamoed you're allowed to trap them. Then afilu kedarko, because our concern is that they're going to leave the grain fields and that they're going to go into the tree field, and they're going to ruin the trees, and that's considered a significant hefsid. So even though you're trapping in the stay lavan, we don't have all the concerns of hefsid, and by the stay ilan we do. Afal pikein, you're still allowed to trap these animals kedarko, because it's only one step removed from the stay ilan, from the tree field, and that is what we are concerned about. 2 dots, quarter of the way down. We had said in our Mishnah, that one is allowed to fix something that's broken during chol hamoed. Let's discuss. Ketzad makrin. How can one fix a breach in the wall? Of Yosef Omer b'hutza v'dafna. You can use branches and twigs and something that's kind of more makeshift and not something that's permanent. B'mas nisatana. That was a shita of Yosef, who's an amora. And b'mas nisatana in the Mishnah, we actually had a bit of a more lenient shita. Tsar b'tzror. You can put rocks there, stagger them in a way where they're balanced. However, they can't be stuck together with mortar, with cement. They just can be stacked there, and that's considered reasonable as well. Rav Chizda taught us, Lo Shanu. When did we learn that these 2 shitas apply? That we have the comment of Rav Yosef and the comment of the Mishnah, that either we can fix the breach of the wall with chutza v'dafna, or we can fix the wall with rocks. That's only true ela kosel hagino. That's only true in regards to the wall that it has a breach in it that is part of a garden. But if you have a wall of a field that keeps privacy, that keeps tznius, that keeps the boundaries of your house safe, then bona kedarko. There are no leniencies. There's no hutza v'dafna. We don't follow any of the lenient opinions. You go to the store and you buy cinder blocks and you get mortar and you rebuild your chutzner, whatever it takes to rebuild a chutzner. That's considered acceptable. No one should be able to walk into your property. It's not the same thing as a garden where there's very little risk. Says the Gemara, a third of the way down, Zayin and Aleph Lema. Maybe we should say that kosel hagochel reshus haravim soser ubona kedarko. That if you have a wall of a chutzner that's leaning over it for a reshus harabim, so what does this brisa say? It says, so sir, you can destroy what's left of it, ubona kedarko, and rebuild it properly, because there's a danger involved. So it says the Gemara, no, That's not the same as our case. We're not discussing a case of danger. Hasam, in the case that you just quoted about the Kosel Hagocha B'Rshus Harabim, that's talking about the Katani Taima Mivnei HaSakana. That case was very specific about why you're fixing the wall. There's a danger, but if there isn't a danger, so then the cases are not comparable. The Ika de Amre, some say that this question about the rickety wall B'Rshus Harabim was not asked in the frame of Lema Misayele, but it was asked as a regular question, and it would look like this. Vika de Amre, some would say, oh, I see that you have these shitas of Hutziv Dafna and Tsar B'Tzror, and Rav Chisda says that it only applies in a Gina, but in a Chatzar, you're allowed to just rebuild. Oh, hold on 1 second, halfway down, Toshma, Kosel Hagocha B'Rshus Harabim Soser Bona Kedarka Mivnei HaSakana, Mivnei HaSakana Ein Shalom Mivnei HaSakana Lo. Maybe we should assume from that brisa that the only way you're allowed to rebuild a wall is when there's a danger. But if it's your chatzar, too bad. That's just too bad. It's Chol HaMoed. There's a Malacha that day, and you're not allowed to rebuild your wall unless there's a sakana involved. Says the Gemara, Leimo Tabitiv to Rav Chisda. Maybe this should reject the sheet of Rav Chisda that when there is a chatzar that has a breach in the wall, that you're allowed to just rebuild. Says the Gemara, Amar lach Rav Chisda would tell you, Hasam soser bonem, hachabone velo soser. In the case of the brisa of the Rishus Harabim, so there we said that one is allowed to break it down, right? The parts that are broken, that's like leaning over, you could just raise it to the ground and start over. That's true and under those circumstances when there's a sakana. But in our case, yes, you're allowed to build, but you're not allowed to first raise it to the ground. That's his distinction. Amar lach Rav Chisda, Hasan so seruvona in the brisa where there's a danger, then you can break down the wall and rebuild it. But hacha in a regular case where there's just a breach in a wall of a chatzar Chol HaMoed, bona, yes, you can build, you can fill in the gaps. However, below soser, you're not allowed to first knock it down. That would be a violation of some Isser Malacha on Chol HaMoed. The Gemara says, Hasam nami listor velo livni. So maybe over there we should say that, okay, if the wall is dangerous, in the case of the Sakana and the Brisa, if the wall is dangerous, just knock it down, but don't rebuild it. Why are we allowing so much Malacha? Says the Gemara, if what you're telling me is that we have a wall, an important wall in Rosh Hashanah that separates public property from private property or something significant, if you're telling me that I can only do stira, but that I won't do binyan, I'm afraid that someone's going to say I'd rather have the protection of a kosel ra'ua, of a weak wall, than to have no protection at all. I'm not just going to destroy the wall so that people can walk freely from one property to the next. That's not happening, and therefore they may end up withholding from breaking down the wall and rebuilding it, from breaking down the wall at least, and they'd rather have this wall, and that's dangerous, and that's not allowed. Amar Rav Ashi Masnisin, our Mishnah is Nami Deka. Our Mishnah is also Meduyak. To what point? We've learned a lot of pieces of information. So take a look at Rashi here. Rashi is 2/3 of the way down. Dibur Hamaschel Masnisin Nami Deka. Our Mishnah is also Meduyak Kirav Chizda. The Gina Eno Bona B'Moed Kedarko. That yes, the machlokes of Hutziv Dafna versus Tsar Tzror applies to a Gina. However, when it comes to a Chater, then you're Bona Kedarko. So in regards to this camp over here of the Gina, so the Gemara says that's mashma in our Mishnah on Chol HaMoed Shelo Kedarko. How so? Diktani uva Shviz Bona Kedarko. That in Shviz, and that we build a wall Kedarko. Says the Gemara, Dehecha, what kind of wall are we talking about during Shviz? Ilema de Chater Tzricha Lemeimla. What's wrong with building a wall during Shviz? Your wall, your chatzar fell down. There's no restriction. It's not Chol HaMoed. That can't be what the Shviz case was in our Mishnah. So therefore, what was the reference to restriction of building a wall during Shviz? Says the Gemara, it must therefore be Elalav Degina. It must be that we're talking about the wall of a garden. And even though it appears that you're building a wall to protect your fruit during a year of Shviz, which is questionable, it looks bad, right? You're building a wall in your field to separate the different grains or whatever you're doing. It's in the field. Says the Gemara, even though it's Legina, Shema Mina, that it's mutter. Next Mishnah. This Mishnah is going to be speaking about Negoim, about getting tzaras. And just a couple of terms that we are familiar with. We have a mitzora muskar and a mitzora muchlad. A mitzora muskar basically is as follows. Let's say I wake up one morning and I see a splotch on my skin, and I think that it might be tzaras. So I go to a Kohen. The Kohen looks at this and he's like, It's not developed enough yet to say you're tummy, but I still see something, so you're not really tahor. So we basically quarantine the person. If after the first quarantine, that's his muskar rishon, if after the first quarantine, the Kohen sees him and it hasn't developed any more or any less, it still looks the same, we'd hold him for a second week. That's his muskar sheni, his second week of quarantine. The third terminology, so it's muskar rishon, muskar sheni, that's all in the camp of mitzora muskar, of quarantining. However, there is a more simple category, which is the category of you're definitely a mitzora. So if you wake up in the morning, you have a splotch, and you go to the Kohen, he's like, this is out of the textbooks, and you're a mitzora. That's called a mitzora muchlat, a definitive, absolutely, you're an absolute mitzora, no svekos. Okay, let's jump in. Says the Gemara, Rav Meir Omer, Roan Asanagoyim lahakel avalo lahachmer. When it comes to Chol HaMoed and Tzaras, if a person wakes up during Chol HaMoed with Tzaras and they go to the Kohen, so says the Mishnah, we have a restriction. You can only be posek for kulas when it comes to Tzaras during Chol HaMoed. How does that even make sense? That even the second sheet in the Brisa doesn't understand that. We don't paskin these shilas during Chol HaMoed. It's fascinating. That means that if a person thinks that they have saras, they don't even bother going to the Kohen. They have to wait till after Chol HaMoed. We don't pass in these shilas on Chol HaMoed. You might be a mitzora. You're not a mitzora until you're told that you're a mitzora. So you have no saras yet. You don't have any negoyim, even though you have negoyim. Until a Kohen says, and we'll learn about this today, until a Kohen says that you are a mitzora, you are not a mitzora. And there are times that we delay them categorically to prevent people from losing out on some possibilities in their life, be it Chol HaMoed, or we'll see about a chassan today. So this is the machlokas that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that we only paskin lekula and Chol HaMoed. But again, how do you do that? We'll see. And the chachamim say, no, we don't paskin nega tzaras shilas at all. The Gemara opens with a brisa. Tanya. Rabbi Meir Omer, Roman is going lahakel avalo lahachmer. Rabbi Meir, quoting it just like it did in the Mishnah, that when it comes to paskening shilas about being a mitzora, so then that has to be only lakula, not lachama. Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo lahakel v'lo lahachmer. You can't pasken either of them because, and this is where we really get into the underbelly of trying to understand Rabbi Meir. He's like, Rabbi Meir, what are you talking about? Rabbi Yossi says, if somebody shows you tzaras, it's possible that you can be mekel, but what does it mean to look at a tzaras that requires you to be machmer and saying nothing? What does that mean? How do you only paskin the kula, Rabbi Meir? That was Rabbi Yossi's question. And then the third shita in the brisa, which is a difficult shita, as we'll see later. Amar Rebbe, near and Divrei Rebbe Meir b'muskar. Rebbe is of the opinion that he agrees with Rabbi Meir that we only paskin the kula, that will only give a lenient psak. And again, we haven't explained how yet, but Rebbe is of the opinion that we agree with Rav Meir that we only give a positive, we only give a lenient psak when it comes to a person who's b'muskar, a person who's quarantined. But he agrees with the shita of Rabbi Yossi that we don't paskin at all when it comes to a person who's a muchlat. Okay, so let's see how all of this works. That was all Tanaim. That was a brisa, 3 shitas. Rabbi Meir had said we're only lenient. Rabbi Yossi had said we don't paskin at all. And Rebbe had this unique opinion, a blend of opinions, where Rabbi Meir was of the opinion that only by a muskar, and that that he holds like Rabbi Yosef in regards to a muchlat. So in trying to understand this brisa, Rava comes to our rescue. Says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rava, bitahor. If a person is currently a tahor, they wake up with a splotch on their arm, but currently they're tahor, they don't know what the tzaras is. Maybe they have psoriasis. So bitahor, when a person wakes up and they're still tahor, they haven't been paskin that they're mitzora. Everyone agrees that on Chol HaMoed, no Kohen is going to look at that person. Not at all, not even a possibility. So everyone agrees that if a person is currently tahor, he doesn't have a psak on him that he's a mitzora, that we don't look at that on Chol HaMoed. Behezger Rishon, in the first quarantine. So again, the first quarantine is this morning, I'm tahor, I go to a Kohen with a nega, and he says, I don't know, I got to put you in the quarantine. So toward the end of the first quarantine, the Kulei Amalo Pligi de Chazile, everyone agrees that the Kohen will absolutely check you on that day, even if it's Chol HaMoed. Where's our machlokas in our Mishnah? The machlokas are Meir, Rabbi Yossi, and Rebbe. Says the Gemara, Ki Pligi, as we turn to the top of Zayin and Beis, the machlokas that we have between the two shitas between the three shitas of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi, that's behesker sheni. That only applies in the end of the second quarantine. So how does the machlokes play out? Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Bekohen Talia Milsa. One shita said everything is dependent on the Kohen's psak. Itahor Amar Le Tahor. If at the end of quarantine number 2, the nega has turned out to be nothing more than just a little skin rash, he'll tell him, you're tahor. But if in fact he's tameh in the hezger sheni, in the end of quarantine number 2, shasik, the Kohen won't say a word. That's the shita of Rameir. Rameir says we only dish out kulas on chol hamoed as it relates to tzaras. It's really a remarkable thing to think about in psak halacha. You get to look at something that you know as a Kohen, as a posek, whatever, that this person is tameh, this woman's anida, whatever, and you just zip the lip like you don't say a thing. It's an unbelievable shita. We're unfamiliar with these kinds of things. So the Gemara says that that would be Reb Meir. Umar Savar and Rabbi Yossi would say you can't choose that. You can't choose to not say a psak. The Torah says l'taharo o l'tam oksiv. The Torah says either to be mitahar the Torah or to be mitame. You're not allowed to be quiet. You got to say whatever the psak is. Okay, it's a hezger sheni, but it doesn't matter. That's the psak. It's not being insensitive, but it's the din. It's the Torah is oker harim. It's just what the halacha is, and you got to move on. That's an unbelievable machlokas. And what's the third shita? And Omar Rabbi Meir, Rabbi had said this shita that near and Rabbi Yossi b'muchlat, that one approach is that we hold like Rabbi Yossi with a muchlat, that we don't paskin anything, and Rabbi Meir b'muskar, and by Rabbi Meir we only give kulas by a muskar. The Gemara says that some people have the opposite, the reverse iteration of this, that Rebbe holds like Rabbi Yossi the Muskar, and like Rabbi Meir b'muchlat the reverse. Says the Gemara, you're right. There's a machlokas in regards to Rebbe as to when he splits his shita, as to when he holds like Rabbi Meir and when he holds like Rabbi Yossi. In one version, he holds like Rabbi Meir b'muchlat and Rabbi Yossi b'muskar, and in the other, it's the reverse. So says the Gemara, Tanoihi aliba de Rebbe. And what is the machlokas between these two approaches? Says the Gemara 6 lines down, Mar Savar Tzav Sod Alma Adif. When we give a lenient psak and this person gets to go back into society, so the first approach is that people really are socialites and we don't want to be separate from the tzibur. And we'll let him paskin on us. That's the shita of Rav Meir. You can paskin on me. You can paskin on me, l'kula. It doesn't matter. And you can tell me that I can go back into the tzibur because now I get to be with the tzibur. Umar savar tzav so the ishto adifale. And one shita who says that I don't want you to paskin at all. That doesn't. He'd rather be in quarantine, even as a muchlat, even as an absolute definite mitzorah, because the halacha is that one can still be with their wife when they're mitzorah. One says he'd prefer to be able to be with his wife than to be with the tzibur. Says the Gemara, there's a diuk in this Gemara that requires some research. The memra is that to say the muchlat moter b'tashmish amita. You have a mitzorah muchlat, he's allowed to have tashmish amita. We wouldn't have thought intuitively on our own that if a person has a status of being chutz l'gimel nachanos, that they should be mutter b'tashmish amita. Says the Gemara, absolutely mutter. Behatanya, after all, the Bryce writes, this behatanya is benichusa. This is a gentle one, and it's just supporting. It's not a question. Yes, it is mutter for a mitzorah muchlat to have tashmish amita. Behatanya, as the Bryce writes, he has to be outside of his tent for 7 days. And that means that's when he is counting the Yemei Sfira of being a Mitzorah. That's getting out of being a Mitzorah. We know the pasuk says by Har Sinai that after the whole Har Sinai experience, Moshe told everyone, you can all go back to your tents, which was a reference to the Isser that he put in place of Al Tikshu al Ha'isha, that one is not allowed to be with their spouses for 3 days and 3 days in preparation for. So we know that an Ohel is a reference to one's spouse and Tashma Shamita. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shivas Yamin Yisperulo, there are the 7 days that he has to count for. Listen to this. Yemei Sfiro below Yemei Chiluto. The only time there's a restriction is in the Yemei Sfiro, when he's counting after he gets the psak of, yes, you were a muchlat, you were definitely a mitzorah, and you're done now. Oh, so then he counts the Yemei Sfira, those days of counting, much like women do today for Hilchos Nida. But during the time of being a muchlat, tashmish hamita is mutter. Yimei sfira v'lo yimei chiluto. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Omer shivas yamim sfira. Kal v'chomer yimei chiluto. And Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda didn't agree. He said, if you're restricted during Yimei Sfira, then all the more so it's true during Yimei Chiluto than when you're an absolute Mitzvah. And Rav Chia says, finishing up this brisa, and this is going to be the strong point of the brisa to show that Tashma Shemitah is mutter for a Mitzvah Muchla when he has a Mitzvah. Rav Chia, Danti Lifnei Rebbe. I was learning and teaching Torah in front of Rebbe, paskening a shaila. So it seems like Danti. It doesn't mean he was paskening, they were talking and learning. And Limad Tanu Rabbeinu, Rebbe has taught us that Yosam from Tanakh, Lo Haya Lo Uziyahu Ela Bimei Chiluto. He was conceived when Uziyahu was a muchlat. Amar lo Afani Kach Amarti. That's correct. That's exactly what I taught. I said that. That's what Rebbe had said. So therefore, we see that Tashma Shemitah is mutter during the Yimei Chiluto when a person is most definitely in the Torah. Why the different shitas? Why is there a machlokas about this? We had seen a shita in this brisa of Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, who says kal v'chomer limei chiluto. So there's just a fundamental machlokas about sometimes how do we darshan psukim, and that's what's going on here. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, savar, the strict one, gali rachmana b'mei sfiro, the kol sheken b'mei chiluto. He made a kol sheken. If the Torah says during your yimei sfira that you're not allowed to be with your spouse, all the more so if you are, by far, all the more so if you're going to be a muchlat. So he held that way. That's very Sephardic. And we know that from a zav, that a person's not allowed to be with a zav, not during a Sfira, not during a Ziva. So that kind of makes sense. And halfway down a little bit more, there's no room for a diuk over here. Whatever the Torah revealed is what the Torah revealed. During the Yemei Sfira, it's going to be asa. The Torah didn't reference what was going on during Yemei Chiluto. If there could be Tashma Shemitah, therefore it's mutter. The Torah only revealed what the Torah revealed. So that's their machlokas. Says the Gemara, and this is fundamental to the idea of Mitzvah L'Meimra, to be Kohen Talia Milsa. We learned at the top of the page that this crazy shita just focusing in on Reb Meir. Let's look at the very top line of the page, that we had said that it's all the Kohen Talia Milsa, and Tahor Amar Le Tahor V'Tamei Shasik. That's the top two lines. That if a person is Tahor, then the Kohen can be Tahor, and if the Kohen doesn't say anything, then you're not Tahor. Then you're not Tamei, even if you have a big nega, it doesn't matter. So says the Gemara, how do we know that's true? Yes, in fact, it is true that it's all the Kohen Talia Milsa. Now, Tanya, after all, it says, Uviyom har osbo, on the day that you, the patient, show the nega to the Kohen. Yesh yom she'ata ro'abo, there's a day when the Kohen will look at it. V'yesh yom she'ata ro'abo. And there are some days when you knock on the door of the Kohen and you say, I have a nega. He says, not today, I'm not paskening Shabbat. So you remain tahor until further notice. Yes, it is all about the psak of the Kohen. Mikan amru, from here, chasan shenolad bo nega. If a chasan just gets married, the day of the wedding, he sees a nega. He's fine. We don't even check him out. No snin lo zayin yimehem mishter lo ulavesu uleksuso. We give him his whole party, his wife, and all of his clothing. None of them become tummy for 7 days. The Kohen won't paskin a shaila about a nega tzaras during that time. Unbelievable. The same is true on holidays. No snin lo shibas yimei haregel. Rabbi Yehuda. So that's the first shita in this brisa, is that we give him extra space, even on the regel, because of Simchas Yom Tov, that we don't, we try and avoid having a Kohen paskin shilas. Rebbe Omer Eno Tzarech. I don't even need, I don't need all of this. This is obvious to Rebbe. Harehu Omer V'tziva Kohen Upinu Sabayis. Says the Gemara, we already have a din in regards to Negat Tzaras by a house that we tell everyone in the house that before the Kohen comes, take all the furniture out, because we know that the Torah writes that if you have nega tzaras on a bias, that the house and all of its contents will become tamei. Well, all of a sudden you can call a moving company to empty out the house. Yes, that's what the Gemara says. Of course you can. That's a shita Rebbe. And and if what you're saying that is we allow you to take out your dining room table in order to prevent it from becoming tamei when the Kohen comes to check on it, we waited a day, however long it took for you to empty out the house before the negat tzaras was checked by a Kohen. If we're willing to wait for something that isn't a mitzvah, kol shekin l'dvar mitzvah, all the more so for a chas and then for Yom Tov. I don't need your limud. That's not how we read the pasuk of Yom Harosbo. It says the Gemara, "My beinayu." What's the difference between the shita of Rabbi Yehuda and the shita of Rebbe. Doesn't seem like very much, and that's of course the first answer. Rabbi, just mashmos dorshan ikavinai. There's nothing real significant in regards to psak halacha. It's the same. They both agree that both for dvar mitzvah and for dvar rishus, both agree that it is permissible to push off the psak of a kohen for tzaras, both in regards to dvar rishus and in regards to dvar mitzvah. However, there is another approach here. The Rava Amar, 2 lines from the bottom of Zion of the base. We're going to go about 7-8 lines down on Chesed Aleph, and then we'll stop. However, says the Gemara, the Rava Amar, Davar Harishus Ikabenayu. There is, in fact, a machlokes about that which is a Davar Harishus. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda. Why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda learn like Rabbi? Rebbe's opinion was really clever. He looked at the pasuk in Chumash and said, like, the Torah tells us that upinu es habayis, that a dvar rishus is mutter. There's no mitzvah in taking stuff out of your house. So it's very clear from Rebbe's understanding of the pasukim in Chumash that it's kind of hard to argue. Like, yeah, if you can take the furniture out of the house before the Kohen comes into paskin, of course the dvar rishus is going to be mutter. So Rabbi Yehuda, how do you look at those psukim? Isn't that obvious? He says, Mehasam, from the case of a house with saras, and we tell them you have a day to clear, you can't learn anything from there. He says, Mehasam lo gamrina, dichidashu. That's not normal. Normally, we don't have kalim in a house that become tummy if they're made out of wood. We don't have things that are mechubar lekarka, things that are attached to the ground that become tummy. That doesn't normally happen. The whole din of a house having saras and all of the content of the house becoming tummy is a chiddush, and therefore you are not allowed to learn anything from there. Rebbe wanted to learn from there that the davar rishus is allowed to take place, to push off the psak of a negat saras. However, that's not Rebbe Yehuda's opinion. He says you can't learn anything from those psakim. After all, top of Chesed Aleph, because a house is simply wood and stones. Lo metamo, and in general, those don't become tamim. Yet here they do. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow for that. Rabbi says, no, you misunderstood. Rabbi Amar Itzrich. Really, we need the pasuk, even though there's an element of chiddush. I agree with you, but we need all the pasukim here. Because of Rachmana, if the Torah only wrote Uviyom Haros Bo, that just on the day of the Kohen, then have a meaning of the Dvar Mitzvah in that, yes, the Kohen can push off his psak for something that's a Dvar Mitzvah, but the Dvar Harishus low, therefore, Kasav Rachmana B'tziva Kohen, to make sure that we know that even a Dvar Rishus is going to be mutter. Because of Rachmana B'tziva Kohen, if I only would have had the pasuk of B'tziva Kohen, so then Havamina Hani in the law Tuma de Gufe. Then maybe only here do we have this leniency of the Parashos because it's not talking about Tuma of the Gufe, it's talking about Tuma of the Bais. Tuma de Gufe. But when we talk about a person as opposed to a house, his Tuma Staras, Ema Michsa that he has to see it and you're not allowed to push off for any reasons at all. That's not correct. Therefore, tzricha, we do need all of the psukim in order for us to have our shita. So this second approach of Rava, which started 2 lines from the bottom, basically teaches us that there is in fact a machlokas between Rebbe, who allows for a dvar rishus to push off the psak of a kohen, and the shita of Rabbi Huda, who says that we can only push off for a dvar mitzvah, but not for a dvar rishus. We'll stop right here, and Emir Hashem pick up tomorrow with Daf Ches. Wishing you all a beautiful day.